Welcome to this interview series ahead of DevOps Live on the 6th and 7th of March at Excel London. I'm Stuart Crowley, editor of Calitii, and today my guest is David Keane. He's the co-founder of Calitii and he's the former global head of DevOps transformation at HSBC. David will appear at DevOps Live in March, but today we're going to talk about 3 significant years of his life that's shaped his life and career. So welcome, David.
Thank you very much, Stuart. Great to be here.
What have you chosen as your first significant year then?
It was more personal, the first one. So I think 1992, which will age me a little bit. I just graduated university and I moved from Ireland to Japan. So my very first job was in Tokyo, and I remained there for 3 or 4 years, which was a great experience, great learning experience. But I've picked it out because I moved from a very Western culture, never having traveled outside of that before. To be immersed in something completely different. Didn't speak a word of Japanese, didn't really know that much about the culture or the food or how to eat with chopsticks, very fundamental things. And so for me, it was a great culture shock, but a real eye-opener. And I think it had a big impact on me in making me think that there's other ways to look at problems, other ways that people go about solving issues. Always considering being more sympathetic to the voices of others and understanding the context of my surroundings. So landing in there as a very naive 22-year-old and unused to the culture and the language, just to learn from it and embrace it, and hopefully be a little bit better for that experience. It was a big change in my life.
What job was it that you took in Japan?
Yeah, so I qualified with a degree in electronic engineering, and the firm that hired me, Kyoto, hired me to do software and hardware engineering as it was at the time. So there was a bit of coding involved. There was a bit of hardware. They made mobile phones and two-way radios. So there was hardware design of those things. And I stayed with them for a couple of years, and then I moved into a finance job there. So I actually ended up trading European currencies in the financial services market. So a very, very different type of job. And I guess those two things, very formative in my career, I've combined since then to try and forge a career in financial services, but with a very strong technical background to it.
Do you feel like it was an accident or planned that you managed to land something like that?
Yeah, I can confirm it wasn't planned. It was definitely accident. And at that stage, do you really know what you want to do? Perhaps some people are driven and they have a very firm idea, and great for them. At 22, as it was, I'm not sure. I'm sure that I didn't have. I was just looking to learn, to put into practice, what I'd been, studying at university, but for adventure and to grow up, really, all of those sorts of things. And you dealt with what you were confronted with next. And it's interesting. I have an awful lot of friends from that era. And I think we bonded in a way that we might not have done if we had been in a more comfortable surrounding city, right? Had we been in London, or had we been in New York or Paris or Western place, it wouldn't have been the same experience for us. But being in such a different place and having to learn on the go, I think forged very strong bonds, and those have stayed, which has been great. But it wasn't planned. You had to see what was in front of you. At least that was my experience, and work with it. And I can't say I have any regrets. It was a great time.
How did you cope with the culture shock? What helped you get over it, perhaps, or did you ever get over it?
It's a great question. It took me time to learn, right? And it certainly wasn't instantaneous. So there were some times when things happened that I didn't understand, that might have angered me or frustrated me. And you learn from those who'd been there a year or 2 years or 3 years or whatever longer than you, and you got to understand why and the context, and maybe it wasn't the incident or whatever had upset me I just didn't understand the other person's reaction, and they didn't understand me. And so it was just trying to get to a level of understanding. So once I learned a little bit of the language, and I never mastered it, but I learned enough to get by and understood a little bit of the culture. Those things, the shock, if you like, and the times that might happen, they decreased, and you got to enjoy it an awful lot more. It is very different, and it was wonderful for being so different. So, you know, all the shocks were great, right? Because they took me to an uncomfortable place where I had to learn, and I had to think about, you know, the context I was in, and being pretty much on my own there, and you know, immersed in somebody else's country and culture. You're not going to change them, right? You have to learn to adapt and to understand. So I think it was a really healthy experience for me. I'm not sure if it was the same for you in Taiwan. Singapore is much more westernized, so it's a little bit easier.
What sort of things did you take back with you, you know, from that experience, and perhaps that you still hold today, those sort of business processes?
You know, the focus on quality was more than anything I'd seen before, and maybe even experienced since. So people took their jobs very seriously, no matter where you were sort of in the food chain. And it was quite a hierarchical society, right? And like our own is. But no matter where you were, the person executing the job took that job more seriously perhaps than they might do in other cultures, no matter where it was. And they took great pride in it being done correctly. And I think we're recognized for that in a way that they might not be in other cultures. And I think that all that, you know, that ecosystem, that way of operating together allowed them to, you know, I was there in the 90s. They had tremendous success, sort of, you know, economically through the 70s, 80s, and 90s. You know, maybe I was the end of it, but you know, things tapered off a bit since then. But it was that industrialist and that attention to quality that I think really struck me and stuck with me subsequently.
What would be your top recommendation if someone were to visit Japan?
I went back last year with my kids. They've never been, and they're quite interested in kind of Japanese culture, manga, and all that kind of thing. And they loved it, right? I was the only person who spoke any other language, and so that made me even if I only had 200 words, that was 200 more than them. So if I had to do it all over again, I would have learned a little bit of Japanese before I went there. People really appreciate that you make the effort, and whilst it's easier now to get around than it was then, I think just making the effort to demonstrate to people that you're trying to adapt, you're trying to understand, you're trying to make it easier for them to communicate with you, I think that goes a long way. So that might be my takeaway.
Moving on to your second significant year, what have you chosen?
I think I chose 2013, 2014, around 2013, I think. It's I'd been through many different jobs. So after I left Japan, I went back to Ireland for a year, studied again, ended up in London in banking, in IT, at JP Morgan, then Deutsche, and on to New York for a few years with them, and then Hong Kong, and all of those jobs, I did lots of different types of roles. I did development roles, I did operations roles, and I did program change type of roles. So all the traditional kinds of roles that you have. And I guess I was always something of a change agent. At least I'd like to think so. I was always trying to improve things and motivated by that. And whilst I had experience, and I think I was probably introduced to agile ways of working in the very early 2000s by some of the Indian firms that I worked with when I was at Deutsche Bank, some of the outsourced partners that we had there. And I learned a little bit about it, and obviously it resonated with my time in Japan and what have you. It didn't really stick in the environment that I was in. So I'd been exposed to it, but it hadn't really stuck, right? And then around 2012, 2013, when the DevOps movement was just starting, I was tasked with trying to improve how operations worked and how some of the IT development in HSBC. And I was kind of looking for a more comprehensive answer than I already had in my armory. And so, learning about DevOps, the philosophy behind it, which is an extension of Agile, in my simple language, and getting people to work together, you're breaking down silos. I love you, Patrick Dubois, who's the person who came up with the term of DevOps, and often regarded as the godfather of DevOps. So I've met him a couple of times in previous speaking engagements, and he's often asked, what does it mean? And I love his answer. It's so simple and so to the point. It's like, it's about breaking down silos, and everything else is engineering. And that was exactly what I needed, and it was something that was truly transformational. Whereas if I look back, everything I was working on at that time, trying to do my best, and I think doing things that were happening in the industry, they were incremental, and we were making things 5% better or 10% better or whatever it might be. But this was truly transformational if done properly, which isn't easy, and takes time. But it does a lot of things. It makes it a much better place to work, which is, not often the place that sort of C-suite thinks about first of all, but it really, really has a big impact there. And I think motivationally for me, having experienced a lot of the bureaucracy and difficulty about getting things done, to find a philosophy and a solution that not only helped us, go faster and break less, as we set out to do, but also improved the day in the life of the engineer. It was very rewarding, if you like, from a financial perspective for the firm, but it was also very rewarding from a hearts and minds perspective, from a people thing, and that was a really big deal. And it allowed me, at that stage of my career, to be rejuvenated and really, follow it through.
You gave the definition of DevOps, and that seemed to stick with you. How would you define Agile? It seems like a strange concept sometimes. I see that word, and I don't see it in a technical way.
It's a set of principles. It's a philosophy. I mean, there's always these arguments, and people ask me. I hesitate about the words, a lot, and even my title, the head of DevOps. I mean, some people look at that and they look at it quite narrowly because their context is also DevOps. It's a tool, right? So you must be, interested in just a tooling part. And in Agile, you have the similar kind of thing. Is it about the ceremonies, or is it about changing the way that you work? And to my mind, they're both two sides of the same coin, really. And if I could come up with a better term, I would sell it to the world. But really, it's about doing stuff better. And if it wasn't too long from my business card and titles of my talks, I would say it's Agile, it's DevOps, it's DevSecOps. It's digital transformation, but really it's just trying to improve things. It is truly transformational if you do these things well, and if you stick to the principles of it. I really try and shy away from definitions around the title. That's why I like Patrick Dubois' one so much, because it's really no nonsense. It's about breaking down silos. It's about people working together, getting rid of those handoffs. And yes, there's lots of really good tech stuff that goes into it that helps. It's the icing on the cake, but it's not the start of it, right?
But you also did mention something quite interesting, that C-suites might not see the entire value of maybe changing a culture or bettering a culture or bettering processes. And perhaps that's reflected in you don't often get a chief DevOps individual, for example. Yeah. Why do you think that is?
Obviously, we're speaking very simplistically and broadly here. It wouldn't be true of everybody, but when in some of the organizations I've been in, certainly, and clients that I speak to now, a lot of the C-suite are faced with very significant challenges and complex problems, and they might be financial. They have to do something about either reducing cost or improving the business opportunities that are available. Certainly very concerned about security, right? Cyber threats, all that kind of thing. And I guess, it might be what keeps them awake at night. Am I going to hit the target? Am I going to have a cyber threat blow up in the morning? And those things are probably more worrying than, is everybody happy? And I'm not at all doing people disservice. Of course, like anybody else, they care just as much, maybe more about their staff and the rest of it. But it's probably less a pressing article, right? For them. And it was really interesting in the transformation that we did do at HSBC. When we went to the board and we were saying, look, we need to do this, and we'd made a few attempts to do it before, mostly within IT, but we went back and we dealt with the business. And we had to speak in a language that was going to get things approved, and that was money. We will save, X million of dollars if we do this. We will speed up our delivery and be more reliable, and also, we'll make this a better place to work, right? And I think everybody thought that was nice and great, but they bought it and they bought into it and they supported it because of the more material outcomes, right? Now, as we went through that transformation, we would never have succeeded, I believe, to the extent that we did, if we hadn't tried to win the hearts and minds of the engineers and putting the engineer at the center of what we did. Had we taken that as our principal selling item to the C-suite at the time and the board, we probably wouldn't have been able to get the buy-in. So it's a learning process for everybody, I think. And so all of these things and hearts and minds and better places to work has its place, but it's rarely going to be the first and the only thing that a C-suite person may care about.
Do you see potential for perhaps a chief DevOps officer, or it's something of a C-level position for that, or do you think it'll be integrated into another C-level position that already exists?
I haven't thought about it before. I mean, my guess is the latter, right? I think that rather than maybe we were talking about terms before, terms come and go, right? And maybe you need something more long lasting. There'll be the chief AI ops officer next, or MML. So I think rather than the title like that, I think that for everybody who is in a significant leadership position, not just in technology, but a firm that depends greatly on technology also, on the business side, they I would suggest, need to become aware and sympathetic to what this movement, if you like, is about, and to embrace it. We hear a lot of people talking about AI and the opportunity that it presents. And of course, that is true. But unless you have taken care of the discipline that comes with DevOps, you are really going to struggle to take advantage of those opportunities. And so we hear people saying they were late coming to the DevOps place, or they haven't quite gotten all the way there, whatever that might mean yet, but they're very anxious to get on the AI journey. I think there's a little bit of learning to happen there, maybe. So rather, long answer to the question, rather than the title, I think that people need to embrace that as a part of their function.
But let's move on to the final year that you've chosen in your life, and I know it's quite a recent one.
Yes, so hopefully I can remember a bit more about last year, right? And so I've spent most of my career in very large organizations, UBS, HSBC, Deutsche Bank, and JP Morgan back in the day, and there's great things about being a part of large enterprises like that. There's also elements of frustration too, because you are part of a large bureaucracy and what have you. And I guess I've always had an entrepreneurial element to me, right? Outside of technology, I've started a couple of businesses on the side, and I've always enjoyed the challenges of that. And so in my last role in HSBC, my last couple of roles, first of all, I ran the transformation for the investment bank, which was about 6,000 people, 1,000 systems, and it was very significant in itself, right? But then to go on to it enterprise-wide, which is 50,000 engineers or so, 9,000 systems, 74 different countries, or whatever it might be. McKinsey's reckon it was the largest DevOps transformation ever recorded. So I felt I had I didn't know what I would do in a large enterprise wide after that, right? And I think you can stay at something and you'll bring something to it, hopefully. But if you stay there too long, you're always going to have a blind spot. So it's probably a good thing for me to move on and somebody else to, pick that up and what have you. But I had, worked with many people and met many people who were leaders in this space over the last several years. And I had that entrepreneurial, ambition. And so meeting and talking with friends over the last year or so, late 22 into 23, I just decided this was the time to go and do something for myself, and so with a few others, we founded Calitii. And we started life in Calitii on the 1st of October. And it's about a whole new set of challenges and things that you didn't have to worry about before. When you're a small company, you don't have a HR department or finance or legal. You have to do everything yourself, and you have to go out and win business. And that's not something that I was used to. But I expected, and has been tremendously good fun, as well as hard work and nerve-wracking at times. But I think from a technical point of view, and I'm lucky to be joined by a lot of colleagues who've been a part of that journey over the last several years, bringing their expertise. Within any context, and our last place we worked together, most of us, HSBC and some of us at Deutsche Bank, they all come with their own constraints and context, and we've learned a lot there. And so to be able to take those learnings and help a new client so they can get through those stages faster, and they can link the dots up a little bit faster, that's very, very rewarding. And even in the early days, I'm finding that. So I picked last year because eventually, after many years of thinking about it, took a brave step to step outside of the protection, if you like, of a large organization, and to back yourself and to go and try and provide a service that we felt that we could that would help clients out there.
Mm. Well, now that you're a co-founder of Calitii, I guess the question becomes, how do you measure success as a co-founder?
For a new company, there's some very basic things that you need to measure success on, and that's getting clients and winning clients, and moving beyond just a concept to actually having a business and flow. And we've been exceptionally fortunate that we've managed to land a couple of very significant clients, major banks, in our first couple of months, which is kind of I think unusual for a startup, right? And I think that's come because the content and the knowledge of my co-founders and the people that have come with me has managed to open doors that perhaps would have been a struggle for others, right? And so that's been very rewarding, and certainly one of our measures. So we want to have a certain number of clients, and we obviously want to bring through a certain number of revenue as a consequence of that. And so there's some of the basic things that we're starting with. We brought together, there's a number of parts to Calitii, and we were trying to help people on their AI journey. It's a lot of what we talk to our clients about. But where we've come from is a lot around IT service management and ServiceNow, which is an integral part of how many large enterprises manage their capabilities in that respect, and also bringing that expertise that comes more from the Agile and DevOps space to marry that and to help clients take advantage of both the new technology and the new ways of working, so that they are prepared for the opportunities that we talked about earlier, right? So when we're speaking to clients, it is those kind of things. Are they secure? Are we helping them to sleep better at night? Are we helping them with their efficiencies? Are we helping them make them better places to work, right? Are they being able to retain their staff better? And those are the kinds of things that people are coming and speaking to us about. And that's how we will measure our success. If we're solving problems for our clients, we're going to be successful. And our clients, tend to come with that financial service, not exclusively financial services. I would say regulated industries, because we're used to dealing with lots of controls and making sure that those things shift from being a burden and an impediment to go faster, break less, and it can actually help organizations with that transformation. That kind of the secret sauce.
So finally, looking forward to 2024, which we're in now. You'll be at DevOps Live in March. So what are you looking forward to? What are you looking forward to sharing and doing at the event itself?
I'm really looking forward to the 2 days of the event. I think I'm speaking on the 7th myself. I'm looking forward to listening to all of the other speakers. I've been to a number of these kinds of events in the last couple of years. First of all, as somebody in attendance who was learning, and more recently somebody who was on stage trying to entertain others as well. But it's always a learning experience too. It's always fascinating to see what are the things that are changing in the market, which ideas are surviving, right? Which ideas are thriving, and the story I'll tell will be partly around the very large scale enterprise transformation that I was a part of, and I'll focus in particularly on a couple of aspects. Those around control, which I've talked about. I think the idea and the concepts that myself and a few others at Calitii have come up with around controls as products is something I think which will serve people very well in the regulated environments, and that's something I want to talk about. And I mentioned the Q&A afterwards. And the second one is purpose, right? And it might sound like a very obvious thing, but I've been through a number of these transformations and spoken to many people involved in leadership roles around it, and it never ceases to amaze me how maybe diverse people are on what the purpose is, or not knowing what the purpose is of their transformation, and why it is so important to get that right, get it relatively simple, I think, in explanation, particularly when you're talking to a wider group of people. So trying to get out the message around what people need to do around shaping their strategy and their voice and their communication around the purpose of transformation. So I'm hoping that those things are well received, and I'm hoping that there's really good, interesting questions afterwards, and I get to speak to lots of people. It's about meeting people. Again, long-winded answers to your questions, but if I can meet 2 or 10 or 100 people afterwards and have a good conversation with them about their challenges, that'll make the whole thing worthwhile for me.